Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this early, last day here at RSA. My name is Cynthia Kaiser. I am a Deputy Assistant Director with FBI Cyber, focused on cyber threat intelligence as well as cyber policy. I'm joined by an amazing panel today. So first we have Floor Jansen. She is the Deputy Department Head of the Netherlands Police, but she's also the head of their Offender Prevention Program. Next to her, we have Abby Deft. She is the Director of Policy and Strategy at the Office of the Chief AI Officer at DHS, but also formerly the Director of the Cyber Safety Review Board. Next, we have Will McGeen, who is a Supervisory Special Agent with FBI Cyber Division, as well as Casey Coleman, a Senior Vice President with Salesforce. So I want to start today by talking about a story. And I think we're going to get into some, larger stories later. But think about you're a parent, and your kid hasn't maybe even really gotten into any trouble. You haven't heard anything. They're going along fine at school, and you get a knock on your door, and it's the FBI, and you find out they're there because your child's committed a federal crime. It's the first time you've ever heard anything. Imagine that shock. Imagine not really knowing until you get to some, pretty serious point that there's been a problem. That's the situation we're going to talk about today. So what I want to do is first turn it over to Will. That story's not unique, is it? Would you please maybe set the scene for the audience about the scope of the problem that we see today, and what does juvenile cybercrime look like in our communities?
Yeah, it's definitely not unique, and I think it's why I'm here. Because we saw it so often in our cases. So prior to coming onto the cyber division, I spent about 10 years in the FBI New York office working cyber criminal cases. And I think a funny story we were talking about in preparing for this was going out on a search warrant for a case from another field office. We were told, hey, there's a guy out in Long Island we think is an insider threat at a Fortune 50 company. It looks like he's stealing data from the company. So we go out. We do the search warrant. Obviously, everybody's very surprised we're there. And normally your first meeting with the FBI is sometimes a surprise. So congrats, you guys aren't having that experience. But we are just there for a search warrant, right? So nobody's going away. And we're downstairs talking with mom and dad about what we're seeing. And dad sees the documents and goes, are those the logs? He's like, that's the logs of the activity. I'm like, yeah. And he looks at it and he says, this is between 2 and 4 in the morning. And his wife goes, oh no, he's in bed every night at 11. And they both look at each other and go, it's our son. And the son had just been hanging out with some of the other agents upstairs, and we went up and said, we'd like to talk to him. And it turns out that he was the insider threat at the company, was actually the kid. I guess dad was a little bit too. He didn't quite have good password hygiene. His password was just taped underneath his laptop. Which is the first place the FBI looks for passwords on search warrants, is underneath the keyboard. But that story is not unique. It is across the country we're seeing increasingly sophisticated cybercrime being conducted by people who are younger and younger and younger. It is terrifying to see as this pathway into cybercrime starts with gaming. It moves into light cybercrime, sort of what we might call digital graffiti, some of this web defacements, DDoS attacks, and it graduates into really significant, serious cybercrime like we're seeing that's making the news now nearly every day, a different intrusion, where your question now is, was that a nation state actor or a teenager in the United States?
Yeah, it's so interesting to kind of hear these stories and then to think about them, the outsized impact they can have. So, Abby, turning to you, the example Will described all happened in, his local area, but the activities conducted by these small numbers of juveniles can really have an outsized impact. Would you please walk us through the Cyber Safety Review Board report and what they learned during the Lapsus review? What juveniles involved in the criminal group really were doing, and what were some of the board's recommendations?
Cynthia, so let me take a quick second. The Cyber Safety Review Board, or the CSRB, is a public-private entity run by the Department of Homeland Security. We like to say it's inspired by the NTSB to review significant cyber events and conduct after-action reviews and develop findings and recommendations. So around this time last year, the Cyber Safety Review Board looked at the hacks associated with a group called Lapsus, which was a loosely organized group of threat actors that exploited a number of ecosystem vulnerabilities. Successfully exploited ecosystem vulnerabilities in order to infiltrate some pretty mature organizations with pretty mature cybersecurity controls. And it was known that a number of members of this group were juvenile actors. And so while the hacks themselves were super interesting because they used low cost, low complexity tactics, but with great persistence in order to infiltrate these organizations. And ultimately, a number of the hacks were not necessarily impacting revenue of businesses, but certainly in terms of operational impact, reputational impact, and on downstream costs like insurance adjustments and other remediations. So they're really very disruptive and outline the potential for future, even more damaging attacks. Really, we've seen their playbook used again and again, even since the report has come out. And the board also found in addressing this issue a number of the underlying systemic issues that Cynthia and Will have begun to sketch out around juvenile actors. We saw them, we heard that a number of them have been recruited by adult criminal actors, literally working in tandem or under recruitment in order to open up the doors for more mature cyber criminal actors, ransomware actors, and the like, and opening them up to, embedding them in criminal activity and opening them up to potential prosecution. And we think about it, and I want to pick up on a great metaphor that we'll use. We think about this in terms of digital graffiti. So if you think about a traditional form of graffiti, somebody breaking into a high school gym middle of the night and tagging the wall with some graffiti, that's not great, but the impact is inherently limited. It's not immediately thought of as a criminal activity. But when you translate that kind of activity into cyberspace, you just dramatically change the number of access points, the scalability, and the potential impact for an organization. So this trend is really adding up to real risk for organizations, but it's also adding up to missed opportunities for what appear to be incredibly talented young people who are able to apply these kinds of tactics to great success.
Thanks, and I mean, you're a pro. You just kept going through all of our the mic issues or anything. Thank you. So, I mean, I think, when we think about really these wider, even just broader access points, I want to turn to you next, Flora. The Netherlands has quickly become a global leader in juvenile cybercrime prevention. So what was the turning point for you when you realized your organization needed to do more? How did you start to tackle the problem?
Yeah, actually the story that I have is pretty similar to Will's. So that already shows that it's such an international phenomenon. Mm-hmm. Every country deals with it. So my team, I've been working with my team for 12 years. And the first case that I was confronted with a minor committing a big cybercrime was a hack on an ISP. It was the national ISP. It was being hacked, and our traces led us to South Korea, Japan. So the team was flying literally across the world. At the end, ending up again back to the Netherlands, to the attic of a parent's house, where a 15-year-old boy turned out to be the offender, and he hacked into the national ISP because he wanted to watch free videos. So you see, there's such a disbalance between the profile of the offender on the one hand and the impact and the scalability of the damage on the other hand. And we've had many cases afterwards like that. We've had DDoS attacks, successful DDoS attacks on big banks, committed by 16-year-olds. And every time we were wondering, it seems like the government is only stepping in at the very end of the cybercriminal pathway. And around this time, we came across the NCA. The NCA in the UK, they had a special team dedicated to offender prevention. And they debriefed, so they interviewed cyber offenders to find out what their cybercriminal careers look like. And we realized that there were so many on-ramps to cybercrime, but there were no off-ramps. And normally the police force, at least in the Netherlands, were known for doing a lot of patrolling the streets, a lot of community police work. So everybody knows the people in their area. and knows what they're up to, and they can observe and correct deviant or criminal behavior. But online, we just don't do that. Online, people can develop a criminal career at light speed without anyone realizing it until we are kicking in their doors. And again, that's a little too late. So that's why we in the Netherlands started the Cyber Offender Prevention Squads, aka the COPS, and that's a team that deters and diverts cyber criminal careers.
So, and then maybe how has that evolved now to today?
Well, we were the second country globally to do this work, and afterwards Finland started an offender prevention team. And about 1.5 years ago, we started something called Intercop, which is a global network of law enforcement agencies who are working on offender prevention. And now we have over 30 countries joining us. The FBI joined November last year. And so, we're very happy with that, because of course, such a big country with such a potential, both on criminal careers, but also on hacking talent, ethical hackers. And we're very happy that you're joining us. So with this country, we have developed a lot of interventions according to the 4D approach. So we deter and divert people who are interested, entering or engaged in low-level cybercrime, but we also degrade and disrupt those who are committed to cybercrime. And we have developed interventions all along the cybercriminal pathway, from campaigns that are addressed to young people at risk, called You're One Click Away from Cybercrime, to interventions at the very end of the cybercriminal career pathway for first offenders, for example. I can explain it a little bit later.
Oh, I mean, I could listen to you all day talk on this. And I mean, I think that we can all agree, right? These are really amazing results. And it really sounds like the Netherlands is using this kind of whole of society, effort that the Cyber Safety Review Board report had noted within their own findings. So, I want to pull that thread then a little further, and I want to turn now to discuss how the private sector sees the problem a little differently, and how you're kind of taking steps to address. So, Casey, can you tell us then a little more about Salesforce's investments into Next Chapter, Slap for Good, and maybe more broadly?
Mm-hmm. The conversation has all been about how this is a unique category of crime that doesn't necessarily have early interventions, it doesn't have awareness, it doesn't have off-ramps. And so it is a whole of society approach that has to be taken. And so glad to have the opportunity to talk about some of the models that we've employed and some of the learnings and successes or growth that we've seen at Salesforce. It really goes back to the beginning of the company. From the very beginning, we've been philanthropic oriented, with commitment to give away 1% of our product, 1% of our time through volunteerism, and 1% of our profits to nonprofits. And our focus is on a couple of key areas, education being one of them, with the idea of not just education in formal ways through schooling, but programs that can offer educational and STEM access programs to people who are talented but don't otherwise have access, and maybe create a pathway that otherwise they might have gone further down a criminal direction. And a couple of those you've mentioned, Cynthia, go into the investment category. So our Slack unit, Slack has a Slack for Good program where they've invested in a program called The Next Chapter. They provided seed capital for The Next Chapter. And that's a program for equipping and assisting people who have a criminal record to develop job skills and to take their technology skills and turn those into a positive direction through software coding training, and then become eligible for mentorships, internships, and jobs with Salesforce and other companies. And I can mention a few others, but that's a key one that is really oriented toward this community.
And I think for me, when we think about the whole of society around this, right, and we talk about the lack of interventions for this population, right, the kid who's spray painting the gym, you've got the chance that the basketball coach, that one of the teachers, a guidance counselor, a community leader is going to see that. Kid going down the side of the sidewalk and scratching up cars with a key. Everyone knows how to react and respond to in real life crime. We all know how to do that. And the average age of arrest for anyone across any crime in the United States is 37. But the average age of an arrest in the United States for a cybercrime is 19. And it's because of those interventions just don't exist, right? The first time that we intervene with them is when police come and knock on your door because you've committed a serious felony. And we know that a felony conviction in the United States is a life sentence in a way, right? It comes with lack of access to housing. It comes with problems with getting jobs. So I love Next Chapter, and what I think is important about this program and how the Dutch run theirs, and I know Floor's gonna get into this in a second, is how do we reach more of these kids before they become justice involved, right? You're sitting in a room really actually hearing an FBI agent say, I want to arrest less people, which is true. I want to arrest the right people, the significant criminals, the ones who are grooming these kids into committing serious cybercrime, not a 16-year-old who's defaced their high school's website. They deserve that community first responder, who's that teacher, that guidance counselor, a parent who's empowered and enabled in how to do that. Again, we know how to disrupt this in real life crimes, right? A kid who's moving towards the path of getting involved in a gang, for example, everyone knows how to divert those kids. And we already divert them into private sector groups. In Brooklyn, there's something called Save Our Streets. And so when a kid gets involved in something that looks a little, potentially concerning, everyone in the community knows how to take that kid and give them an opportunity to do something else. We don't have that right now, and it can't be run by the police. It has to be run with the private sector, with nonprofits, NGOs, private sector, academia coming together to do what Cyber Safety Review Board called that whole of society approach that Ms. Kaiser's referenced, because we need to do more to give every one of these kids the choice of becoming a cyber professional instead of a cyber criminal and finding all those different pathways into the private sector, into whatever career path they want. We should just be here to tell you what's illegal and not illegal. I'd love to give you the choice to never meet an FBI agent, right?
And to that point about the sort of the triad of government and nonprofits and private sector, another program that I wanted to mention is one that I've been involved with in my last 3 organizations, including when I was at GSA and then another firm and then now at Salesforce. It's a program called Year Up, and it is for young adults 18 to 24 who don't have a high school degree. And so they're in a place where there's not a lot of opportunity, and it is a 1-year program. The first 6 months it's a competitive admissions, and the first 6 months are job training skills. So how to show up, how to comport yourself in a professional setting. And then the second 6 months are with a tech company, including Salesforce, to learn job skills that are relevant for the technology jobs that they're aspiring to. And through that program, they become equipped to then move into professional careers. And we've, at Salesforce, hired close to 1,000 people through that program. And they sit in our high talent entry-level development program where they can continue to be mentored and continue to be partnered with people who can kind of, again, come alongside them and continue to help them grow.
And Floor, there's some really cool kind of like camp options, right, that you've been looking at and doing and actioning in the Netherlands.
Yeah, and as you can see here, this is the cybercriminal pathway. It might need a little explanation, where you see how people grow into more serious forms of cybercrime. And these are examples of interventions that we have developed. And basically all the interventions are carried out by a combination of people from the government, the police, and the private sector. And they are so key to the co-development for us. Yeah, and I'll highlight 2 examples. So the reboot camps you mentioned are basically a workshop of 1 day for kids who are at risk, but also the kids who are most talented and might become ethical hackers. So we give sort of school trainings at school. It's like an hour-long talk about cybercrime, cybersecurity. Can be done by anyone, cybersecurity professional or a colleague from the police. And at the end of that hour-long workshop, they do an assessment. They give all the kids an assessment. And if they score high enough on skills, but also on risk, so they answer questions around risk, they are being invited for what we call the reboot camp. And on those reboot camps, these are workshops of a day long. They do everything. They learn about risks online. They learn about how cool it is to work at the police, what kind of cool jobs there are in the cybersecurity industry. And they learn about everything that we do, and they game with the police. We've got big gaming chairs, and you can just contest against the police. So yeah, when we first started, we thought, who would give up their free Saturday to have a workshop organized by the government? But it turned out that there was a lot of interest. There were barely no shows. Everybody was really excited, and the comments that we got back was that they finally sort of felt at home in that crowd, because a lot of these kids have friends and parents who don't really understand the world that they live in, and they don't really understand their interests. But on the reboot camps, they meet like-minded people, and that was really, really nice for us also to hear. And then that mirrors Hack Right. Hack Right is an intervention that is punitive, so it's for first offenders in cybercrime up till the age of 30 even. So young first offenders, we consider 30 young. And within Hack Right, they follow a sort of a community service program that can be shorter or longer, determining on the crimes that are committed. And these community service on cybercrimes are carried out by, on the one hand, a probation officer, and on the other hand, a coach from within the cybersecurity industry. And they always do an assignment to pay back to society. So, for example, kids who have DDoSed have developed a website where you can test your IoT devices if they are vulnerable to become part of a botnet, those kind of things. And the combination of people from within the cybersecurity industry who really understand their lives, and probation officers who work on that ethical compass, you could say, that forms a really strong combination. And the reoffending rate is like 1 person out of all the people who follow the program. So it seems to be pretty successful.
So, I mean, I think it's really interesting to think through that model, but then also maybe how that could or could not apply to the US. So Will, I mean, turn to you, like, what is the US model for something like that? Like, who should be responsible?
Yeah, and I appreciate that, this pathway, right? You have the primary interventions, secondary up to tertiary, right? There's, I think, importantly, and Abby, your work on the Cyber Safety Review Board, again, pointing out that whole of society approach, seeing the COPS program as a model in the Netherlands. How we adopt that in the United States is, first of all, not calling it COPS here. I don't think a lot of our young cyber kids want to join the COPS program. But nevertheless, though, it has to be that solution that involves and gets key engagement from academia, from educational institutions, especially for the young kids, right? It can't start at 18. It has to start much earlier than that with educational materials, how kids can keep safe online from cyber criminals, and to prevent themselves from becoming cyber criminals themselves. So building up that K through 12 education, gamifying cybersecurity and staying safe online. There's a very cool program called Hack Shield where kids get to be the cyber hero, and they actually teach their parents and their grandparents cybersecurity through the game. It's very cool. Scaling up from that, what the FBI starts to get involved with, right, is when somebody's committed what would be kind of one of those gateway offenses, the digital graffiti, a DDoS attack, and you see that pictured here in the cease and desist program. That's a knock at the door from a law enforcement officer that says, your activities have come to the attention of the FBI, or written another way, your child's activities have come attention to the FBI. That's a powerful letter a parent has now received. But we can't just then knock on the door and say, okay, good luck in your future endeavors. You're 15, we'll see you in 3 years as the FBI, or hopefully you haven't committed a crime in that time. So instead, those interventions need to come with a robust program of the ability for that kid to harness that talent, that intellectual curiosity, to explore the different pathways in this. Again, that's where we come to academia as a key stakeholder. There's a program in the United States at a university that is looking to pilot a 12-week online class for a kid who's had a visit from the law enforcement officers. 12-week online free class comes with 3 hours of college credit, and it's basically a cyber opportunities class. So talk about like, what's in it for me? Why should I do that? You're getting to expose yourself to some of the programs out there, the different options that are there, and I'm getting free college credit. Reboot camps are awesome. I would love to see those happen in the United States. Again, sponsored by nonprofit entities and private entities that have the money to be able to do that. But not everybody can travel to those, right? A lot of folks can't afford to do that. We need to be able to reach the kid who's in Lower Manhattan, where, your fun fact, that's Sabu from Anonymous was based on Avenue D right there. That's our version of going all over the world to figure out who the kid is, and we could actually see his apartment from our office. All the way to the kid who lives in rural Montana who would have to take 5 flights to get to New York. So we need to be able to provide that, meet them where they are, where are those kind of community resources that can meet them. And then finally, I would love to see, and we're working, this is rightly where I believe the FBI belongs, where law enforcement belongs, is on that Hack Right program. We can't just create a program that says, if you hack good enough, you can join the FBI's Job Seekers program. We have to provide that course correction with consequences. When someone fails to have that first or second intervention, or we get to them, unfortunately, we didn't have a chance to have that intervention, there needs to be now a prosecutorial remedy because there's a victim that's been harmed by this activity. But this is a unique population that has a unique ability to repair that harm through a restorative justice program like Hack Right, where they can pay back to the company that they might have caused harm to, or in some way come up with a project where they can work together with a private sector mentor and probation to do something better. That reduces recidivism, right? London School of Economics has a study that even failed exposure to diversion in gang violence in the United States is a 10% reduction in the likelihood of recidivism. And successful completion of a diversion program has a 90% reduction in recidivism. But when we put you in prison, after that time we say good luck with your housing, good luck with education, good luck with jobs, and your skill is that you know how to hack, well, that's a pretty attractive prospect. So how do we reduce that? And even if our only obligation in law enforcement is to our next victim, we should be focused on everything we can do to prevent that next crime from occurring. And in every one of those steps, so from the educating every kid about staying safe online and not becoming a criminal, from those first kids who are going to need that robust mentorship during their teen years to prevent them from falling in that path, and for our first offenders who are engaged in significant enough activity that they need an intervention that's more serious, every bit of that requires a whole of society approach to be effective in that. So we're looking to build that kind of program for the FBI to be involved where it makes sense in a limited way within the justice system, and for the community to really be taking on that role and hopefully coming up with a better name for it in the United States than cops.
Well, you have to work on your image, Gray. In the Netherlands, it's just fine. But you highlighted a very important element there, and that is the talent that we need to preserve. And that's sort of the slogan of Hack Right, is we have to prevent reoffending, but also preserve talent. Because the cybersecurity industry, you guys, you're going to be needing so many colleagues over the next couple of years. We already do, right? We already face an issue there when it comes to finding the right staff. So if if half of your potential employees end up in prison, what are you going to do about it? And that's why I think this is really a responsibility that we carry together as the private sector and the government.
Casey, can I turn to you a little just for some reactions to that?
Well, this is this conversation about recidivism is causing me to reflect on some work we've done with a cohort of other tech companies, because a person with a criminal conviction record, even if they want to take on a different path and a different life, a lot of doors will be shut to them forever. The ability to get jobs, many jobs, surprisingly, even in a lot of trade positions, require background checks and clean criminal records. The ability to get a mortgage or set up a bank account or participate in volunteer civic activities like be a volunteer at a voting station. Just participating in normal life is in many ways constrained, and that can divert a person back into the thing that they know how to do. One of the things that we are doing, along with many other tech companies, is relooking at all of our hiring processes and all of our job position announcements to see if we're possible, if we can take off the requirement to do a background check or have some kind of a different approach to that is more inclusive and more restorative.
And I think there's some really unique ways to be able to get some of this done. And Flor, I want to turn to you again to talk about some of the ways that you found simply deboosting search terms can have a profound impact. Can you tell us a little more about that and the impact that it's had?
Yeah, absolutely, because even though we're a smaller country than the US, and we are able to organize regional reboot camps, and people don't have to travel more than half an hour to get there, and we were always looking for more scalable options, online interventions next to offline interventions. So again, back to the on-ramps to cybercrime. If you don't know how to commit a DDoS attack, what do? Right? You Google for it. How do I DDoS my high school? Or how to hack my friend's computer? This is just that the search engine providers are being used a lot for this. And the search engine providers return criminal websites or criminal forums. Everything is really out there on the clear web. So we figured that it's very easy to learn all your skills just by Googling. But what you're not learning is the rules and the consequences for both the offender and the victim. Mm-hmm. So we simply decided, and actually it was the UK starting with that, so I'll give them the credit, decided to build our own advertisements. And instead of advertisements for booters or hacking websites, we have advertisements that say, if you buy a DDoS attack, if you commit DDoS attacks, this is what will happen to you. This is what you risk. And these are the consequences for the rest of your life. So it's simply an advertisement. It's a very low-cost intervention with a very big outreach. And when the UK first started to do this a few years ago, Cambridge University, completely separate out of the intervention, was doing some research into the effect of the intervention. And they found out that it was a very effective intervention because it's something that people are faced with right at the very moment that they are at risk of committing a crime. They are in their own houses, on their own computers, searching for terms, and then are confronted with a message from the police saying, maybe you shouldn't do this. And Cambridge University showed that in the time that the advertisements were live in the UK, the number of DDoS attacks actually dropped. And they interviewed people and they said that for them it felt like sort of a tap on the shoulder when they were looking for crime. So yeah, it's a very scalable intervention that we now as the police carry out. We've done this with 7 countries later, and every country had their own campaign in their own language from their own local police or own national police. So it's been successful. But the next step is see who should own this intervention. Should it be law enforcement paying for these Google advertisements? Because then the search engine providers get paid twice. First by the criminal people who build, for example, booter websites and advertise them on Google, and then from law enforcement saying, maybe you shouldn't do this. So we're looking for, well, the private industry and the search engine providers to take a step forward and own interventions like this.
I mean, you bring up a good point because everything we've talked about today takes money. And, Abby, if I can turn to you, what's the hardest thing about all of this? Is it funding, not full awareness of the issue set, something else?
Yeah, I think it really falls into 3 buckets. Mm-hmm. The first one is around funding, but also incentive structures. Where are the optimal? Where is the motivation to act or not act? The second bucket is really around awareness of this as its own issue set. And Casey and Will really talked about this. This is not your typical nation state actor. This is not even always your typical ransomware actor. And this is not exactly the same as some of the other interventions around juvenile criminals in the physical space. And the third one is really, at least at the time that the CSRB put together a report, an insufficient partnership ecosystem. So across those 3 areas, look, money will move the needle. We've spent tens of billions of dollars on cybersecurity from both the public and private sector in the US, and we don't have any programs yet. That Fleur described, that we've heard about from the UK, some exciting work from the private sector, but we're just not at that level of scale yet. And in terms of incentive structure, there still are incentives for young people to participate in online criminal activity. And in the second bucket, the awareness of the issue set. I mean, this is a unique set of challenges that requires a unique approach, as Will talked about in such great specificity. And the meaningful focus on this issue will drive funding. And we in the government know that once you get it into the budget as its own item, you can really build on that. And the government, in its role as a convener, can also designate grant-making dollars and other resources. and raise awareness of this as an issue. And we've certainly seen that over the past year in between joining the Intercops agreement, in between the CSRB raising it as an issue, in between the National Cyber Director raising it as part of the National Cybersecurity Implementation Strategy. And finally, the meaningful partnerships is really, really key, because these types of programs can't be executed or even developed by just government or just private sector or just nonprofits or just schools. And I think really coming together and building those more mature partnerships and building an ecosystem of stakeholders who are really invested in addressing this will go a long way.
And I think I want to leave folks a little bit of time for questions. And so I think I know we could all crosstalk and talk about this, and we have for a long time. But I want to end with some next steps for everybody here, which is how you can do something right now. If you're here, you're interested, you're listening in, exploring ways that your community can help educate. So ad buys, community programs, offline, online materials. And so, going to your own local school districts, your own local places, creating the cyber defense clubs in your community. And then in the next few months, engaging in your community, putting education plans in motion, exploring bigger programs, thinking what your companies can do in this space, and then reaching out to local law enforcement, local schools to help develop some of those new programs. And really, I think, what we all want to get across to everybody here is reducing juvenile cybercrime is possible. And we really owe it to future victims to get this right. So with that, would love to take one or two questions.
Okay, I'll give you two questions. I'll ask the second one first. So, Cybersecurity Review Board, I don't remember your name, but I remember what you do. You talked about removing background check, I think, Salesforce. You talked about removing background check. And I think that might be the wrong focus, right? Because it's good for an employer to know what happened in the past, right? And other people who observed behaviors. But I think the mistake is the amount of weight we put on that. Right? We automatically say, oh, that's a boat anchor around their neck, I'm not going down with that ship, right? And instead, perhaps remove the static bachelor degree or high school credential required, right?
Yeah.
And because especially in the world of computer programming, we're not teaching skills. Those aren't the skills we're assessing in high school, right? We're assessing whether or not you're going to be a good citizen. Right? That's what we're supposed to teach. By the time you get out of high school, you're supposed to have learned how to be a good citizen and be a participant in society, right? So what do you think about potentially just replacing those static requirements that mean little in some of these jobs and going with some kind of an online assessment of skills for someone who's going to apply?
That's a good point, and that is another part of our overall commitment to equality and equity and equitable access. We have gone through and continue to monitor all of our job applications to ask for no more than is necessary with educational credentials.
And if I can add to that, actually, in the last few weeks, the White House announced a reduction in the need for a bachelor degree for the 2210 IT series. So it no longer requires that bachelor degree, and that's part of some of the national cyber strategy and the workforce potential for that. So I know that. That's a really exciting development for all of us as hiring managers up here to really think about how can we reduce those barriers and just get great people in.
And then the second one, you kind of sort of answered it early on in the presentation, but in the space of intervention, right? I think you kind of skirted around this, particularly FLUR, and isn't it more of a question of talent recognition and redirection, which you can potentially do earlier, as opposed to waiting until there's indicators of cybercrime activity? Try and do it even earlier than that, recognize the talent, and maybe pull them aside and say, hey, looks like you might be mischievous if we left you all by yourself. How about this?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And again, that's why we cannot do it just alone as the police, because that would be, maybe, in my opinion, the wrong actor saying, this is the police, we recognize your talent, go that way. I mean, they like the cops in the Netherlands, but not that much. But yeah, but that's absolutely true. And I think the earlier you are on the cybercriminal pathway, the more important it is to recognize that talent and to do something with that. And as police, we can add something to that. But I think our role is more heavier at the right end of the spectrum, where there's more criminal elements to it.
Right, and maybe perhaps you just said cyber criminal pathway. I think the goal here, at least myself, is to get someone on the cyber citizen pathway as opposed to criminal.
Yeah, we actually have presentations in which we show underneath the cyber criminal pathway, the cyber skills pathway, and we want to sort of organize off-ramps from the criminal pathway to the ethical hacking or cybersecurity pathway.
And I would say two things. There's a group that I'm familiar with in New York who's trying to build what does the US program look like on this, and their program for K through 12 is called digital citizenship. Like, how do we develop your good digital citizenship? And I think that's a perfect term for it. To your point about talent, I think we're seeing with some of our young kids who are engaged in this, the democratization of cybercrime is such that I don't actually need to be particularly good. I don't need to know how to code anymore. And especially if I can just social engineer my way into something, because I'm very cunning and very good at that, that it might be harder for us to identify what we would traditionally think of as talent, but it's those risky questions. It's the kid who comes up to this computer science teacher in 11th grade and says, like, hey, if I did this, would that actually result in this? Like, the only reason you're asking that is because you're thinking about how to break things already. But I think there's opportunities there for sure about how do we develop that good idea of your digital citizenship. Again, from our in real life parallels, we know exactly what something feels wrong when we're a kid. We know what how lying feels. We know how it is if we're trying to hide something, if we steal something from the grocery store. But it is amazing how quickly you find yourself at the precipice of a major cybercrime. And if you haven't had a single roadblock set up, if you haven't had a single person putting even like a stop or a slow or a yield or a caution sign up in front of you in that whole pathway, it is really easy to just keep going down that path, especially when you're 15 and your parents are giving you an allowance, but I can make a couple $1 million with Bitcoin. It's really difficult to try and put the brakes on that activity.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, seeing no more questions, any last thoughts from the panel here? Well?
I correctly pointed out in the Cyber Safety Review Board, there is no program like this in the United States. I sit before you as an FBI supervisor. We are looking to build this program. How do we make this effective, meaningful here? There are opportunities through nonprofit organizations that already exist, for-profit organizations that are doing amazing work in this space, but the coalition that's trying to get underway here, I understand if there are concerns with thinking you're getting in bed with law enforcement. I think that's why it needs a nonprofit organization. It needs an organization like Next Chapter to be really taking the leadership on this. We are trying to build that program because I do think that like every one of these kids is somebody who has the chance to go do something great in their life. They have that talent, they have the skill. And I think as a testament to you being here at 8:30 in the morning on the same day as Alicia Keys, you really recognize the importance of this. So please come find one of us. There's just so much opportunity here, and would love to join up with any of you to try and make that happen for these kids.
Yeah, know that we are willing to share everything that we have developed in the Intercop network, and that includes the stuff that we develop with the private sector. I know this country is very big on property rights, but it's all there for free. You can take from it what you like, and also use our network. Also, the network of the private sector is, of course, quite international. A lot of countries are, a lot of big organizations, cybersecurity organizations, are international. We work with Trellix, for example. They are everywhere. So, yeah, feel free to come up to us and ask what you can have from us.
Great. Well, thank you all for coming out on early Thursday morning, and we hope you go out into your communities and help us make a difference.
Thank you.